Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Meehan. I'm the Communications Director at the Northeast Clean Energy Council. Excited today to speak to Mike Bloomberg, Managing Partner at Groundwork Data. Groundwork Data has produced a really interesting study on the future of gas in New York State. They were asked to come in and do an independent analysis of it to really look at what's going on with the gas system and what it's going to be in the future. And so without further ado, welcome, Mike. Glad to have you here. Really excited to talk about your report. And I'm going to kick you off with a real quick question. Tell us, what is the future of gas?
Expensive is the one word answer. We were lucky to be approached by the building decarbonization. This is something that we've been looking at since we started Groundwork Data about a year and a half ago, but those of us with the firm have been looking at for 5 or 10 years is, what is the future of gas? And we've made a lot of these climate commitments and passed climate laws at the state level. And when the rubber meets the road and we need to start delivering on them, you pretty quickly see that these 50,000 miles of gas pipes and the amount of methane that we're pumping through them, they don't really hit those climate goals that we've made for 2030, 2040, and 2050. And this multi-billion and nationwide multi-trillion-dollar industry of gas is going to change. And that's going to create changes for consumers. It's going to create changes for the utilities, the regulators, the shareholders, the bondholders. And to date, there really hasn't been an exhaustive analysis of what does that mean for you and me. The regulators have taken a look at it and they've asked gas companies, what is the future of gas? And so with this report, we really wanted to take a more independent lens, a more consumer lens to say, well, what's going to happen to customers?
All right, and so I want to note for everybody who's watching, this report dealt with New York State, but this really applies to all states throughout the Northeast. It's we're all using gas. In fact, I saw in your report, I think it was more than 50% of the consumers in New York State are using gas for heating. Is that correct? Yeah. So let's get right into that cost. What's driving those costs? What's making the gas system expensive?
Yeah, I think it's a common misconception that there's difference between what makes gas spike and decline and what makes gas generally expensive. So the cost of gas or your gas bill has gone up steadily over the past decade. And it has spiked at certain times. It can spike when there's a shortage. It can spike when we have a conflict, and the conflict that we're having, it's certainly spiking in Europe right now. But the overall cost of the gas system, when it comes to the distribution utilities in places like Massachusetts and New York, where the supply of gas is separate from the distribution of gas. And I want to just point out that difference, because there are states where the gas company is both the supplier and the delivery of that gas. In Massachusetts and in New York and in several other states, our gas utilities are just responsible for the delivery. And so they pay for the gas as it comes into the state, and they make their money delivering it to you. And so the cost of gas to you, the cost of the use of it, is just a pass-through cost. So if the supply cost spikes, your costs spike. If it declines, your cost declines. But what makes up a larger percent, usually 2/3, if not more, of your gas bill, is the fixed cost of that delivery infrastructure. It's the pipes and the substations, and predominantly in New York, it's 50,000 miles of gas distribution mains, each of which connects to your home or your building with a service line that delivers the gas to your stove, your heater, and whatever gas appliances you may have in your home.
And you found that what was the per mile cost of fixing a gas main for the average person? What you found?
Yeah, so the gas system dates back. The first gas pipe in New York was laid in the early 1800s, around 1817. The first gas utility, or the first franchise authority in New York State, was 1823. Massachusetts has already started laying some gas pipes at that time, and the city of Baltimore was the first in the country. Those gas pipes, a lot of them were old cast iron, and they were used to transmit coal manufactured gas. So they would turn coal into coal gas, pipe that to homeowners, and for the first 70 years, it was mainly just used for lighting, replaced whale oil. Really hit into New Bedford's economy of reducing the amount of whale oil that we needed. When electricity came along in the late 1800s, the gas industry was able to pivot to heating, and they tested out other appliances: gas-powered refrigerators, gas-powered air conditioners, of course, hot water heating, which we still use today, dryers, irons for ironing clothes. So, the gas usage continued to go up, and they were able to repurpose a lot of those old pipes. It was really once we started to get into the early and mid 1900s that those old cast iron pipes and the way that they were welded together, the way that they were manufactured, and their sizing was very difficult for handling the new type of gas that we were using, which was quote unquote natural gas, or the methane gas that was coming out of really up from Texas and Oklahoma, but also more recently from Pennsylvania and New York. And there were massive overhauls, massive transition from coal-powered gas to these 1,000+ mile pipelines of natural gas delivered to our homes. We saw a large changeover and a multi-decade increase in the mileage of gas pipes. And really by the mid 1900s, we had switched over from cast iron to steel. We had significant technology improvements in how we were able to weld pipes together. We started to see the emergence of plastic piping in the latter half of the 20th century. And we were able to build out these massive multi-thousand mile districts of gas heating. Now, today, that's a long way to get us to today. Those pipes that were installed and built out in the 1940s, 1950s, 1960s, which was a period of some were cast iron and some were old, unprotected, uncoated steel pipes. Those pipes leak. And leaking pipes cause a lot of damage, both to the environment, the atmosphere, in terms of methane leaks. There's huge safety risks. And, we know that in Massachusetts, where we have the gas safety enhancement plan following the explosions in Lawrence, Massachusetts. And if you look back in history, each state has their own examples of some of the safety challenges that come with the use of fossil methane gas. And so we're replacing
an explosion at a chocolate factory in West Reading, Pennsylvania. 7 people dead. Gas explosion.
It's a dangerous fuel, and it's that danger that's led to federal and state policies to accelerate the replacement of gas pipes, which on its surface makes a lot of sense, methane being both bad for the atmosphere and a safety issue. The challenge is when you're replacing a gas pipe, that's really expensive. Gas pipes are underground. Replacing an electric cable, that's up on a telephone pole. That's a pretty quick, easy, and low-cost process. Replacing a gas pipe involves digging up the street. In fact, probably 85 to 90% of the cost of replacing a gas pipe is all about the trenching and shutting down of the street and digging up the pipe. It's not the actual cost of the pipe itself. So we've been doing this for years. And the gas companies in New York are spending roughly $3 million per mile to replace a gas distribution main. And that's the cost of the gas company. That's what they're borrowing or they're getting from their shareholders to do the replacement. What you and I pay is much larger. Remember, we're paying for the rate of return to the gas company, so they're making money off of this. We pay taxes that the gas company is able to pass through their tax costs, their income tax, their property tax payments. We pay a salvage cost, so we're actually prepaying for the removal of gas pipes, which is an expensive endeavor because, again, that means digging up the road again. So at the end of the day, it's about $6.2 million per mile in New York that we're paying to replace a gas line. And remember, there's 50,000 miles of gas. There's another 8,300 miles of what's considered leak-prone gas pipe. That's those old cast iron and unprotected steel pipes. And it just happens to be that there's about 100 customers per mile in New York State. So you can think that's about $62,000 per person every time we're replacing a mile of gas main.
That is a hefty sum. I just want to note, Rhode Island Energy just announced that they're doing $290 million of electrical line and gas line work. Gas lines makes up $163 million of that. So they're spending $163 million essentially to replace lousy gas lines so that they can put in new ones. And they're almost invariably wider gas lines, which requires more gas to keep them pressurized. So you're also buying more gas to keep them pressurized to fix the leaky lines that are dangerous to you in the first place. So it's a system that keeps perpetuating itself in terms of cost. So I want to shift over, though, to what's disrupting their business model. It's a great model for them. They've been in business for a long time. What is the trouble they're running into?
Policy and competition. Policy, we have states that are passing climate laws. We have the federal government, which is passing large infrastructure and climate bills. We recognize that there is a cost to the use of fossil fuels. There's a cost to, there's a global cost to it, but there's also a local cost to it in terms of air quality. There's a hyper local cost to it in terms of the air quality within your home, the safety within your home. We're passing policies to assign those costs. Competition is, there are, in America, there's always someone looking to make a buck, and they recognize, well, for 120 years, electricity has hardly competed with gas because of price when it comes to heating. When it comes 120 years ago, electricity for lighting, gas for heating. That equation is starting to change. We're starting to see much improved cold climate air source heat pumps that can take the outside air and make it warm enough to heat your home even through the coldest days of the winter. We're seeing a lot of advancements in awareness of how to do proper insulation within a building, advancements in HVAC tools and technology to circulate air and allow us to have well-sealed buildings that are still able to circulate air really fast. And we're seeing a lot of advancements in geothermal technologies to be able to use ground air and water to help us heat our homes. And so we have technologies that are coming down in price to deliver a better product, and building owners are now given it's no longer oil versus gas, it's oil versus gas versus electric as an alternative. And as this report shows, if we start taking into account the actual cost of that gas, those electric alternatives seem to be a much better long-term bet. And one of the things we hear most as well, isn't a lot of that electricity made from fossil fuels? Isn't a lot of that come from gas? Well, you're right. It's not the best bet for tomorrow, but these are decisions that are spread out. A gas pipeline, when we decide to install a gas line, your utility is recovering the cost of that gas line over likely a 65 to 75 year period. So we're not talking about just what's best for tomorrow. We're talking about 65, 75 year timelines. And every state has set these, every state in Massachusetts and New York and many other states have set ambitious targets that we are on our way to hitting for the generation of clean energy. And as we are able to place more clean energy on the grid, and that the energy we're using is from renewable clean resources, the amount of fossil fuels that make up our electric supply is continuously going down.
And if we're retiring gas as a heating source within a window that ends in, say, 2050, that also means they can't recover their costs over 65, 75 years. Suddenly that lowers their timeline to get their money back, which increase your costs, correct?
That's a big if, and that's a big concern for the gas companies right now. And so you would think, and they have for the past decade or so, gone full speed ahead with trying to replace as many gas lines as possible because it's big dollars for them. Now, the way a gas company determines how much they're able to recover from a pipe depends on the year and the cost of the installation of that pipe. So a gas pipe that was installed in 1950 for $50,000, if we retire that gas pipe, then that's $50,000 less that they are charging us. If we retire a gas pipe that was installed last year for $3 million, could be the same length of pipe, but because it costs $3 million to install, that's $3 million less that they are able to charge customers. And because they make a percentage on that cost, 8% of 3 million is a lot higher than 8% of 50,000. So the gas companies have a major financial incentive to install new gas lines. And if you look at the last 10 years, it's a hockey stick chart for gas pipelines that have been installed and replaced. However, there's significant concern now among the gas utilities. Many are starting to think ahead. That they might not be able to get all that money back. And this is one of the biggest legal questions that we'll be facing for the next 10 to 20 years is, do they have the right to recover the cost of that gas line? And if so, who's going to pay for it? I'm not a lawyer, so I can't answer that question. But we have done quite a bit of research into what's going to make something recoverable versus not recoverable. And it's certainly something that we have precedent in. We have precedent with railroad investments. When railroads were taken over by cars, the railroad companies were not able to recover their full cost of their investment in rail tracks. And it can certainly be expected that can be a challenge going forward for gas companies.
That brings me to where I wanted us to end up, which is, how do we downsize this system? Obviously, people are dependent on it. I eat my home with it right now. What are the technical challenges and what are the policy challenges to get us to, say, 2050, where we aren't using this to heat our homes?
Well, different people are going to have different answers. I want to frame that when we look at this from a groundwork data approach, it's not purely a climate lens. There are ways to accomplish our climate goals, quickly and on target. But we're also worried about the consumer and the consumer costs, the equitable distribution of this to make sure that everybody has the opportunity to participate in this energy transition. And if the only way we're going to get there is by tripling everybody's utility bills, either A, we're not going to get there, or B, there's going to be some really angry people along the way. And that's where our report really digs into, is that there are ways to hit our climate goals, to improve and clean our grid, to improve the comfort and convenience of our homes, whether we are renting or owning them, in a way that doesn't jack up our utility bills. We call that a managed phased transition. And it's really where we started this conversation. If your avoided cost of replacing a gas main is $62,000 per customer, that's where you need to be looking at. We should be thinking about electrifying or non-pipeline alternatives to replacing gas lines. So for every one of those 8,200 and change miles of gas distribution main in New York, we need to be looking at, what can we do besides replacing a gas main? In many cases, that is, improving insulation of homes and adding air source heat pumps. In certain situations, it may be that air source heat pumps alone can't handle the coldest weather, in which case the use of non-pipeline fuels is a huge benefit. Think of the fixed cost of a propane tank compared to the fixed cost of gas distribution main. You can buy a propane tank for less than $1,000. If that's needed to be used for 5 years, 10 years, that's the real bridge fuel here, not the natural gas that flows through those gas pipelines. And then, we're all really excited about what we can learn from geothermal and thermal energy networks, connected geothermal wells. That's going to be a high capital expenditure, and it's going to need to be weighed against, investments in homes and air source heat pump alternatives. But that's really the area for pilot projects. We happen to be leading the nation in Massachusetts when it comes to pilot projects for thermal energy networks. Really excited to see how those play out. But at the end of the day, we need to stop replacing gas pipes with more gas pipes. That's the number one takeaway here. It's the number one thing that is going to continue to contribute to emissions, but B, it's going to keep driving up the costs for customers. And it's a real opportunity to help bring down the costs of non-gas alternatives.
Excellent. Mike Bloomberg, thank you so much. I'm going to note that we did an entire event on decarbonizing building heating, which featured Michael Walsh from Groundwork Data, talking about the very things Mike Bloomberg was talking about here, about how do we actually decarbonize these systems and leverage things like connected geothermal. So we're going to include that in the chat below. We're not in the chat below, but we'll include that in the tagline below. We will also include a link to the Groundwork Data report on the future of gas in New York, which really does apply to every state. Mike Bloomberg, thank you so much for joining us today. Glad you could take the time. Everybody read this report. It's going to really be something that I think opens your eyes as to where the system stands and how we need to move forward. So again, thank you so much. Thank you for everybody who's watching.
Appreciate it.